You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glen Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glen Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And we've been doing a fair bit of that these days. And today, one of the outputs of that work is a conversation I had with Saroop Bharwani, the CEO and co-founder of a company called Senso, San Francisco-based firm that's tackling a very specific issue around Agentic AI that we'll get into in just a minute. I think it's a really interesting conversation, so I hope you'll enjoy that. That's coming up in just a bit. First, I want to remind you can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out the website big-fintech.com. I'll also remind you that we now have a date set for our next CU Town Hall, and that will be, drumroll please, Wednesday, May 20th. That is at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And it happens to be a week after our Innovation Club twice annual in-person session, which is taking place in the Midwest. I wouldn't be surprised if we have some follow-up conversations based on some of the hot topics that pop up from there. As always, the CU Town Hall is free to attend. You do need to register in advance. If you go to cutownhall.com, you'll find the way to do that. We hope that you will attend and also be actively participating, because the whole idea is to surface the most important issues to people in the credit union community, share best practices, and really kind of do a little bit of brainstorming. So hopefully you'll join us for that one. I've been getting a lot of FaceTime with students recently. I thought I'd just kind of share some of the thoughts around that one. A couple weeks ago, I guest lectured at the University of Wisconsin in an undergraduate course in consumer financial innovation. And I've been doing this now with this group in this same class, obviously not the same group. The kids change out every year. I think I've been doing it for about 6 years now. And it's amazing to me. Again, it's always this things that change and things that don't change. And, a couple of the things, I'm always updating the slides with the most recent information. I show a few videos. I love to go back to the Finovate demo archive and show videos that I think would resonate with them. And they're also instructive to kind of say, okay, well, what did you see that? Who were they talking to? What's the pain point they're trying to resolve? Things like that. So this time, I've been showing it for some time, but one of the videos that I love to show is with a company called Debbie. And I'm pretty sure many of you know about them already. We've featured them a few times here on the podcast. And it's a video that was from their, that actually was kind of their coming out party, the Best of Show winner in fall of 2020. So it's only 3.5 years old. It's also, a young pair of founders with a very kind of top of mind issue in terms of dealing with consumer debt. So it resonates really well with the students. But I thought it was interesting as we went through it this time, I suddenly realized that they were talking about how they modeled some of their behavioral science nudges to get people to behave in ways that would actually improve their financial situation. They compared it to Noom, the weight loss app, which many of you probably remember was a pretty big deal back then. As I'm watching the 7-minute demo afterwards, I thought, how many of you have heard of Noom? And I realized I got a whole bunch of blank stares. So I explained it a bit. And then I realized, well, they were a really big deal. And then the GLP-1 showed up. And the entire approach to weight loss kind of shifted. So I did a quick look. I looked up Noom just now. They are still a company. But it's amazing. It even says right on their the little profile that pops up in Google when you look them up, now with meds. So it's no longer just behavioral. It's needle-assisted ways to actually control your weight. And we'll come back to that whole kind of concept in a second. But in the process of looking into these things, I also found out Debbie, which involves no needles whatsoever, has just completed a $5.3 million additional venture capital raise. So congratulations to them. I'll be finding out more about that and sharing. They've been part of the Reseda Group for a while. I know they're a prominent piece of the portfolio and the digital mobile banking app within the MSU FCU, the Michigan State Federal Credit Union. So great news for Debbie, wonderful company. Always enjoy kind of keeping track with Frida and Rachel over there. A couple other things that happened again on the student front. Onto a Gen Z panel that we put together at CU Innovation Day that took place at Georgia Tech's Accelerator here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm at. And brought 5 current Gen Zs as young as a high school senior, and then the rest were college students, including one that was a graduate student in IT studies, I believe in kind of the mid to late 20s. So interesting range, but all Gen Z. And it's just fascinating to get, immediate kind of firsthand verbatims from these groups. Brandy Bickle, our friend from Georgia's own credit union, moderated the panel, did a great job of teasing out the information. I think everybody agreed this is a great kind of sanity check to understand how people are thinking about things. One of the things I thought was interesting, we asked the question of how often people go to branches. The answer, not surprisingly, is not very often. One of them said, yeah, I think I was there a couple of years ago when my mom brought me and wanted me to open an account. I got the same reaction when I asked that at the University of Wisconsin. And somebody did acknowledge they were there recently when they got to college and they opened an account because they discovered it was actually easier to do in person, which is kind of amazing in this day of account opening. Even the young folks are still deciding to go into the branch for that. The other question that came up in both settings, and this is another one of those examples that you can't always draw conclusions across the board. Things, even within the same group, they don't all behave in the same way. I was surprised at the University of Wisconsin. I did a little kind of Slido poll on the screen and asked how many of them carry cash and how much they carry. And I was stunned. This was higher than it's been in the last couple of years. So I'm not sure if it's evidence of any kind of a trend. But 80% of them roughly said that they do typically carry some cash with them. And I don't know if there's a geographic aspect to that, because I did notice there's more surcharging based, again, anecdotally, what I saw when I was visiting the Midwest this last week. I don't see as much of it here in Atlanta, and I did not see as much in terms of these 5 students talking about their use of cash. 2 of them I thought was interesting. Said they always carry a $20 bill with them. And then Brandy asked the question, well, why is that? Well, my parents told me I should always do that. And then they both pointed out that they carry that cash in the back, in that little pocket, the rubber affixed pocket on the back of their phone. So if they lost their phone, they'd lose the cash too, which kind of defeats the purpose, which I thought was kind of interesting. Another thing around the Gen Z side and the branches, even though they don't go in it, the study, and there's a wonderful, I'll share some more information on this too, a wonderful study that's been done on a regular basis in one of the Foundations of FinTech class at the Georgia FinTech Academy. And despite the fact that the Gen Zs are not going into the branch, they still value knowing it's there. So kind of tricky from an ROI perspective, but there is still value in knowing from a kind of security blanket standpoint that you can get there if you need to. Finally, one more event that was similar to that, the Georgia FinTech Academy that I've done some work with before, I judged a competition of students, and I'm always so impressed with what they come up with. There were 4 different tracks answering different particular challenge questions and making presentations on it. The track that I was looking at had to do with distributed finance, DeFi, and to what extent it threatens the existing banking system. And I thought it was really interesting that all 3 of the groups that I saw present came up with similar conclusions, but not in the exact same way. They all kind of said it doesn't replace the existing banking system. It unbundles it. It cuts out the middleman. It evolves the infrastructure. And one just said, yes, it does create a threat, but not yet. So some of the stuff that we've been hearing about, I'm not so sure that's all that different from what I hear from talking to people in the industry. But again, from a Gen Z perspective, I thought it was really interesting. Another one that came up because we talked about the trust aspects of DeFi versus, non-bank companies and trusting them with your money compared to traditional insured institutions. And one of them made what I thought was a fascinating observation. They said that trust means different things to different generations. I parked that one. I'm gonna kind of stick with that and think about it a little bit more. But I think it's also a perfect lead-in to the conversation we have with Saroop from Senso. So let's just jump right into that. How's that for a transition this week? I'm here with Saroop Bharwani, the CEO and co-founder of Senso. Saroop, we met earlier this month at CU Unplugged, and I'm sure you'd agree that AI seemed to be the prevailing kind of topic that everyone wanted to dive into in a variety of different angles. But I find it interesting that your company Senso has taken kind of a specific approach that I haven't seen too many other folks kind of identify, which is kind of adding a context and trust layer to help kind of companies regain narrative control over the positioning of their product. Is that a good way of kind of kicking it off? Is that kind of a good description?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Glenn. Really appreciate it. It was very nice meeting you a couple weeks ago in San Francisco. Senso is really focused on AI governance, and I think that at this point in time, when we've had enough time for financial institutions rolling out RAG systems and enterprise search, and now agents in their enterprises, everybody's starting to ask the question: how do we ensure that these systems are reliable, traceable? How do we ensure that when auditors or regulators come and they kind of want to observe what we're doing and examine our processes, that we have answers? So that's become a hot topic. My company, just having done research and just me running an AI lab for about a decade now in regulated spaces, really focus more on how do you ensure that models adhere to policies, procedures, guidelines, so they're predictable. And that's really come to fruition right now, where there's a lot of demand for organizations asking for that. So it's a good time. And a context layer, think about it as a centralized source of knowledge run by agents that's always kept up to date, with subject matter experts and humans in the loop to ensure it's up to date. And being able to score actions that agents take place in the platform in a reliable way that creates transparency and an audit trail. And I believe that every credit union, every financial institution is going to need this in the very near future, especially as these agents really start to perform more serious operational tasks like payments and lending. So narrative control is a concept on how do you actually control what the model says or takes action on. And we've built a system that allows organizations to embed that into their operations, as well as now agents are executing on the web too. Representing credit unions on the web using their website is something that marketers haven't really done before. So really being able to control agentic behavior, both internal and externally, is what our service aims to do.
You answered one of my questions right out of the gate in terms of how you found this specific pain point to address. So you were running an AI lab for a decade before this, and that's, you kind of saw that this was an unmet need at this stage of the game.
The first 5 years of Senso was a services company that was an AI lab, working with highly regulated organizations, ingesting all of their unstructured data and building models that sort of tried to replicate the behavior that these LLMs do. But we were a little bit early when we noticed that large language models started to really emerge in that 2019 2020 standpoint, leading up to the launch of ChatGPT. We just very early on saw that there was an opportunity to really kind of productize this and bring it to an industry we knew very well at scale, and that is our entry point is financial services.
Got it. So, yeah, and you've mentioned a couple of times expertise in terms of regulated industries, and I guess you mentioned clearly an audit trail is extremely important in satisfying the regulators. But when you talk about narrative control, it's there's an internal audit to make sure that you're conveying your message, because there's a decent risk that you can kind of lose control of the way that people are portraying or perceiving your organization too.
Correct. And keep in mind, there's a completely new ICP we're building for right now, and that is an agent. And there's no infrastructure
I'm
for
sorry, ICP is.
It's an ideal customer profile.
Got it. Okay.
Right? Like it's like I'm a service I'm a vendor, I'm a services company, and I build for credit unions. I'm usually building for a CTO, a customer support person, or everything, right? But I'm still building for those people. But who I'm building for in the organization is actually the individuals managing agents, and those agents require new sets of infrastructure, right? So this whole concept of tracing and thought tracking what an agent is performing is so new that a lot of organizations just don't know how to approach it. So really providing them with the infrastructure to be able to approach that in the right way and have that audit trail available and accessible, so that when a regulator or an audit happens, they're ahead of the game, much ahead of the game, is essentially what I believe every CIO and CTO and CEO is trying to figure out right now.
What's interesting, you mentioned kind of building for the CIO or the CTO. I'm thinking of it more in terms of building for the prospect or the end user customer, where again they may have their own agent that may ingest this information in a very different fashion.
And that's the byproduct. So essentially, if you can reduce liability and have more predictability in the action, actually serving a customer the way they're supposed to be served with some sort of risk mitigation embedded in there, then you can enable members, customers to perform transactions that are highly regulated and there's a lot of oversight on. And we're getting there. Agents are actually starting to transact on the web right now, agent to agent, on behalf of consumers. And so, if a financial institution wanted to assign an agent to a member that's personalized, they'll be able to do so knowing that that agent is reliable in production. And they're able to observe and monitor that agent and have an audit trail. Because things inevitably are, they're probabilistic now and they're non deterministic. So there's things that are going to happen that are unexpected. And you just need to understand kind of what percent of the time do those unexpected things happen. You need to surface up the evaluation to a human reviewer so they can fix it so it doesn't happen again. And
Yeah.
you need to ensure that the risk part to ensure that if anything bad happens to the consumer, they're going to be taken care of. And you can also kind of answer to any sort of like oversight that is going to be needed at the time. And that solution, again, doesn't exist. And that's why we're really focused on providing regulated institutions with that capability.
Now, you mentioned financial, specifically financial services. Is that your entry point, or are you working more broadly across other sectors as well?
Our direct focus right now, just because we understand it very well, are financial institutions on the retail banking side. That's something we know, like we understand how, lending, uh, all types of lending products, payments, disputes, chargebacks, all of those things are domain specific verticals that we understand very well. But we've built a platform. So we have partners both in the financial services space and broader that recognize that their customers have the same problem as well, right? And this spans retail, like getting into agentic commerce, and various other industries. So our infrastructure is used by various distributors to offer this to their customer base too. But directly, we love working with financial institutions and insurers as well.
I was going to say insurers are, again, that kind of the bridge to healthcare, which I would think, again, a highly regulated industry, which again would seem to lend itself quite nicely.
Yep, absolutely.
I seem to recall, I think it was Cloudflare's CEO that you quoted saying that we should be prepared within a year or so that there's going to be more bot traffic hitting websites than actual human traffic. Did I have that right?
Yeah, by 2027, according to the CEO of Cloudflare, there's going to be more agents crawling the internet than human traffic. And it's happening so fast. So if you think about the traditional website where a human would visit that website and use a chat bot to onboard, talk to customer support, maybe click a page, click a button, fill out a form, that whole concept is very different when an agent crawls your website, right? And the type of context that an agent needs to execute is vastly different and needs to be approached differently by a marketer or a web designer or someone who's managing a website than it is before. So there's this whole infrastructure change that's happening now that agents are going to be crawling the web, and it's very happening so quickly. But yes, it's a natural phenomenon. Right now, most of those agents are ChatGPT using a web search tool to crawl the internet
It's
and
almost like
give
screen
someone.
scraping, it sounds like to some extent.
It's a web search.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a web search right now.
So, and I believe in kind of validating that point. One of the other attendees at CU Unplugged mentioned they've already seen that volume kind of, overtake the internal, the human volume, which, it also strikes me that when, at least maybe not in San Francisco, when I think about bots, I'm usually thinking, okay, maybe somebody who's up after some nefarious purpose. But we're talking about bots here that are actually going out, being authorized by individuals or whatever to do the bidding of the actual end consumer or the end user of whatever sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes. So yeah, when you think about bots, you think about bots on Twitter just putting on fake comments and everything. I totally understand the word has a certain like stigma to it, but no, we're talking about agents that are purposely executing tasks on the web or in workflows completely autonomously. That's what we're talking about here, and really like the proliferation of agents on the web discovering endpoints, and APIs to purchase is already happening right now. Agents are out on the internet making payments. We're slowly seeing when lending protocols emerge. That's a little bit more like happening, a little more laggy, but payments are certainly executing on the web right now. And it's interesting. It's the volume is increasing day by day at a pretty exponential rate. So it's really interesting to see. And these are not like bots; these are actual agents making transactions.
And another thought that I have is it totally changes the whole concept of SEO. I think you mentioned the phrase forked websites. Kind of, you're setting up almost a shadow so you can satisfy whatever needs, whether it's a robot or whether it's an actual human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that like we call them offsite domains and like, specific. I look at a website for an agent as an endpoint that agent or a set of agents can discover and purchase information, contribute information, and really perform tasks, right? An agent just needs the information necessary to execute a task efficiently and the ability to discover it. So I believe my gut's telling me, and what I'm seeing in market is there's going to be a proliferation of new domains that are specific for agents. And it is sort of a fork. The web is forking to one that serves agents, which has a lot of negative implications to it, right? Like GEO is a concept where you're optimizing for generative engines versus SEO, you're optimizing for
links. We got the acronym picked already. Okay.
Right. So and there's a couple of them: generative engine optimization, answer engine optimization. It's so new that not the name of the actual space hasn't even been set in stone. So in credit unions are now starting to kind of take wind of this, as you mentioned, to say, hey, are our members really on 10 blue links anymore or searching on Google? Maybe, but we know that many of them are on ChatGPT, and we're already starting to see that in our traffic. So how do we optimize for the answer to not only make us appear in it, but also represent us in the right way so our compliance teams can sleep at night? And how do we constantly keep that information up to date and tracking? That's new data, new metrics, new insights that are available. And this is only going to get closer to ads, ChatGPT, which is launching very soon, agentic commerce, enabling transactions for your products or services on the web, and embedded finance, embedded pre-approvals, embedded loans. And we're actively working on bringing all of this to market. And it's super fun just to see it emerge and working with great people in the space to make it happen.
It occurs to me too, when you talk about if you have an existing member, you want to make sure that you continue to optimize their experience. But what I'm also hearing is the prospective member, the one you want prospects to actually be able to discover you. So,
Right.
This totally changes the equation of how they might find you in the first place and how you may come across to them when you do that.
Yep, exactly. And I think that like the way that I see this playing out is every human is going to have, an agent or a set of agents that works on their behalf and communicates with other agents. So agents of, the credit union, you're ultimately your primary credit union. But also, there's nothing stopping a fleet of agents at a competing institution, let's say JP Morgan, from speaking with your agent to maybe offer a better offer, right? Then it's like price versus service, right? If there's a choice between price versus service, that member is going to ultimately have a choice, or the agent is going to have a choice based on the preferences and the memory and the authorization and approval of that particular member. Some are going to prioritize service, some are going to prioritize price, right? And the agents are going to be doing the work in the background, constantly communicating, monitoring, right? And optimizing for what is the best for that particular member. If they're, a member of your institution and want to stay with your institution, or one in which that optimizes for, hey, I want to get a better price, right? So that's kind of where we're going, right? Agents working on behalf of us on the web and internal workflows to really provide us with a better service and a better offering based on what we prioritize and prefer is the true need.
That's another angle I hadn't thought about too. The agents may be acting on the behalf of your competitors. So you've got a whole other front that you've got to defend in terms of getting that, or make sure that the message is getting out the way you want it to. You had made a comment that the learning process, the transfer of learning, is underway between humanity to the actual models, and that the subject matter experts are at a premium right now. They're being given some pretty hefty pay packages to actually facilitate that transfer. How does that fit into the overall equation we're talking about here?
Mm-hmm. That's the market for human data, right? So there's this entire space that's emerged over the last like few years, especially where AI labs and enterprises that are training their own models are purchasing human data. And what that means is they'll hire an expert, a human expert. Usually it's a gig worker, and it potentially is someone overseas or an expert that's locally that has very specific domain expertise. It could be you know a lot about physics, or you know a lot about legal and accounting, and or for accounting it's W-2s, like very specific domain expertise. And what you're doing is you're really kind of identifying the problem that the model does not accurately, effectively know at this point, and you can test that across frontier models, open source models. And then you're literally contributing knowledge, labeled knowledge, created and annotated, and selling that data set to the model providers, usually, or enterprise that wants to implement that in their reinforcement learning pipeline. And reinforcement learning has gotten to a point where it's very effective in being able to replicate human knowledge and basically perform very well in performing that task. So let's say it's a W-2, being basically automating the W-2 process so that an agent can do it on behalf of a human with human verification in the mix saves a human a lot of time, because filling out a W-2 is very expensive. Or it's not expensive. It's just like you got to pay someone and it takes time and everything. Imagine you can get that instant and for extremely cheap, almost free, right? So the services that these model providers, these AI labs want to provide is like, hey, we just want to provide it cheap, so you don't have to go to a human to do it. And there's this whole transfer of knowledge that's occurring across domains. And the best way to know about what an AI lab is working on is to tap into the wealth of human data, the human data market, to find out what data sets are most sought out in market at this point. 6 months ago, it was PowerPoint, Excel. Now it's like I'm seeing domain expertise. I'm seeing physical AI because robotics is popping and really kind of having its moment. So it's a constantly evolving market with no rules.
So you mentioned that was the AI lab was kind of the model that Senso began in. So am I thinking about it right? It's almost like a different kind of niche middleman in the market that actually works with the human data and then becomes the provider that then sells it into the models.
There's a lot of brokering happening in the market. So there's a lot of brokering, and there's like identifying the buyer and the seller and being that person in between is a huge opportunity that I feel like, I'm spending a lot of time in San Francisco, like only people in San Francisco really know that this market exists. But it's starting to trickle out to the rest of the world. And I think that people are recognizing that, their data, their human data can be monetized. And
that's fascinating. I had never thought about that angle of it. Wow.
Yeah, it's a big market. You can make a lot of money. It is getting quite saturated in the valley, so you got to find your angles. Like, what is your angle of data you want to sell? Because quality is important, quantity is important, and the focus of domain that you want to buy needs to be validated in demand at that point. And usually, that demand is driven from consumer need, but mostly the competitive nature of the frontier labs.
Wow, very, very interesting. So in sitting in the room over 2 days at CU Unplugged, I mean, we had a lot of conversations around AI. With the perspectives that were being brought to the table from the credit unions there, or other fintechs as well. Anything about the way they're thinking about it surprise you, or any kind of specific twists that you suggest that people think about things a little differently?
Yeah, it's all about timing. And I've been working on like artificial intelligence for quite some time. And sometimes when you're working on stuff really early, the market needs to catch up to you. So when I launched this particular product in the credit union space in 2022, 2023, it was a little bit early. No one had really deployed like RAG systems in their workflow. GEO wasn't a thing. Like, 3 years later, we've come to a point where most credit unions have deployed a RAG system internally. Enterprise search is enabled. They're starting to roll out agents. They're starting to recognize that their website is being cited by these big ChatGPT, Perplexity, and they're starting to get traffic. So now I feel like everybody sort of got their feet wet, and the big thing everybody is certain on is this is going to happen. Now, kind of like that governance question comes into play, like, how do we protect ourselves? from what can go wrong. And just me working with regulated industries and compliance teams, I just think that there's a lot of problems to solve from a governance standpoint. And it starts with knowledge being fragmented in an enterprise. And the first opportunity, the first thing we do is aim to consolidate that knowledge into a centralized knowledge base, or context layer, as we call it, that is self-healing by nature, with a human in the loop to verify that as that centralized base run by agents gets smarter and more robust, that it's accurate and scored and available and accessible.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in just a second, but it also kind of ties together to the approach we had at Unplugged. What came to my mind was the very first vote. The first thing that came to the top of the list was stablecoin, which I think is still a little less mature in the thought process. And that showed by the fact that it was just stablecoin, period. It was just kind of this broad amorphous concept. We already had about 5 or 6 or 7 subtopics within AI because people had thought about it enough that they had these. And so this is one of the areas that people have to drill down on. And it's a pretty significant prerequisite, as you point out.
Correct. Yeah, it all comes from need and demand. And I just saw at CU Unplugged that the need and demand for governance right now is high on the list. And again, it's all about timing. So I like to say that, we're a solution that's like, 10 years in the making, but right now, like, it's the perfect time, perfect circumstances for us to really provide value in an industry when there's a true need, and really expand the capabilities as the space evolves. Like right now, we're talking about AI search and RAG systems, like search in your enterprise, internal and external. But this is going to evolve into kind of ads, commerce, payments, lending, payroll. Like all of these services are going to be run by agents. And the entire way that we interface with all those services today is going to change because agents are going to be running all of them. So if you think about the opportunity ahead of any organization in my position to work with industries, that transformational shift is something that I want to be a part of, but I think every credit union or financial institution will want to be a part of too, because they don't want to be left behind, right? And they want to ensure to keep up with the times. And I think that pull from consumer behavior of billions of people using this platform is just, at this point, I think it's inevitable, because if you look at your own behavior, you probably use ChatGPT many times a day, or Claude many times a day, or Gemini many times a day. So in your own behavior, you can see that this is not going to go back. We've gotten past the point of no return.
And for you to show Senso's value to the individual prospects, credit unions, financial institutions, my understanding, you offer audits. Is that the way you kind of go about it? That's kind of a good entry point for people to get a feel for the value proposition?
I'm a big believer that the days of a vendor locking in a credit union with a deal that they don't like are over, right? Like that needs to stop immediately. I believe you need to provide a customer with initial value, a glimpse for free. And the easiest thing I can do is a free audit on your website, see how you're performing on ChatGPT. And I issue, free credits for any credit union to try us. And we have our application, but one of the strategic moves we made, because we recognized that the world is starting to use Claude Code and Codex, and non-technical people are learning how to use the terminal. We recognized that very, very early on. So we have a set of APIs, and we launched a CLI. And a CLI is a very easy way for a Claude Code and the agents that are working in Claude Code to basically consume your service. And I was with a credit union executive yesterday prior to joining the meeting. He proactively, he was a marketer, not even a developer, took our CLI on our website, installed it, saw this magical experience about how the application populated automatically using agents. And literally we hopped on the call and we were talking about real stuff, because he knew the value we could provide going into the meeting.
So you don't even need to have somebody do the install. It's something that's that ready, kind of user friendly.
Take a block of code, put it in Claude Code. In minutes, you'll see, and you can make a decision on whether you want to proceed with the solution. And then it's really got to decide what you want to pay in the beginning, and it's usage based. I guarantee you that when you start using our service, you'll start seeing outcomes, and you'll want to buy more, because you're going to get more of that value, right? And so this whole lock-in for services, and there's a lot of incumbents that do this. I won't call them out, But I talk to a lot of credit unions that are sort of frustrated because they're working with customers, vendors that don't really care about the customer because they have them in lock-in through their service. And I just don't think that's a way that anyone should be doing business anymore, right? And so we just make it really easy. Free audit, consume it via our CLI, because a lot of people are using Claude Code that, that's a new type of user, and then expand with us based on the value you see, the outcomes.
It's not only try before you buy, but it's also ramp up as you find the ways to, demonstrate that you bring value. That's great.
Exactly.
So, and it's Senso.ai, and is there a specific page I should direct people to kind of get that experience? Or
Yeah, just Senso.ai, and there's an onboarding for a free audit. Happy to provide that to any credit union. And there's an onboarding for our CLI for more technical people that want to just launch in the service in with Claude Code or Codex. And look, here's the thing, right? I want to provide the industry with insight. So now we're tracking about 1,000 credit unions, and the primary citations that are being used on ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google AI overviews. So what you're going to get in the beginning is not only a view of your credit union, but how you benchmark in your location across many credit unions, across most of the major model providers that are consumer and member focused. So come talk to me if you want to get insight into that, and would love to build a relationship.
Wonderful. That sounds like an offer, a tough offer to refuse. That sounds pretty impressive and appealing. Saroop Bharwani, CEO, co-founder of Senso. We'll have the link out there in the show notes. Great talking to you, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
It occurs to me I probably should have mentioned this before the interview, but Saroop used the phrase RAG systems, which I was not familiar with. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So it's a little bit of the learning aspect of AI, so you don't have to go back and basically start from a clean slate of paper every time the same question gets asked. Once there's some research that's been done, it winds up kind of getting archived and, for lack of a better word, remembered by the system for the next time that somebody asks it. So we'll post a link to the information over at Senso AI. The idea of them doing an audit, talk about a try before you buy. I think it's a pretty powerful approach to try to convey the power of what they're doing. And again, they were one of the great, success stories of our CU Unplugged. Saroop had the opportunity at some point when it made sense to kind of show what he could do because it came up organically and people were interested in the topic. And there we had the subject matter expert to actually walk us through that. And that's what we're hoping to do more of as we do hopefully version 2.0 of CU Unplugged in the not too distant future. So we'll keep you posted on that one. Stay tuned. Stay tuned to the Bigcast as well. My name is Glen Sarvati. My firm is 154 Advisors. We're here with new content every Tuesday. You're hearing this probably while I am exhausted on the road at a couple of trade shows, both the Smarter Faster Payments Conference put on by Nacha in San Diego, followed by one red eye away, coast to coast, the NACUSO Reimagine Conference in Orlando, Florida. So we'll be coming back with interviews and recaps and highlights from both of those over the next couple weeks. If by the time you hear this, I'm probably out in Orlando, say hi if you happen to be at NACUSO Reimagine. All kinds of great stuff going on, plenty to talk about. We talked about X Money last week. We've got all kinds of other interesting things coming up in the near future. Let us know what you think. Let us know what's top of your mind, and we'll dig in as appropriate. Again, big-fintech.com is a place to find out more. If you go to the media tab, you'll find all of our past episodes. If you want to kind of catch up, we'll post a couple links to some of the recent ones too that we think you might find interesting. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on last week's conversation with Andrew Warren of the Financial Health Network. Talking about their looking into the definition of the underbanked and how the traditional definition that was coined by the FDIC back in the 1990s probably doesn't apply anymore based on the way the market has evolved, and kind of raises some interesting policy questions we may want to be looking at, both from a strategic standpoint within the credit unions themselves, but also from a regulatory standpoint too. So we'll post a link to that one. Again, more coming soon. My name is Glen Sarvati. Our Grand Poobah's name is John Pest. You can find us both on LinkedIn, as well as the Best Innovation Group itself. Check in next week, subscribe, like, whatever you do on your podcast apps of choice, and you'll be informed when the new information is out there. Until then, thanks so much for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.